Hi, and welcome to the Vann Attorneys webinar today. We're going to be starting in about 5 minutes, and we look forward to the conversation. We are very grateful that some of y'all actually sent in questions ahead of time, which we're going to address today. And if you also have questions throughout the webinar, many of y'all have dialed in before. You know you can do it two different ways. You can use the control panel on the GoToWebinar screen. You can submit a question that way. Hi, welcome to today's webinar. My name is James Vann. I'm an attorney with Vann Attorneys. We are located in Raleigh and Charlotte, North Carolina. And we're going to be looking forward to our conversation today and are grateful to many of you who sent in questions ahead of time. So we're going to be looking at some of the tips to be thinking about for how to handle your accounts receivable and looking forward to 2019. So again, we thank you so much for your participation and for your questions. So we're going to be looking at some of the 5 essential tasks your accounts receivable team should be looking forward to accomplish in this year and looking forward to 2019. Just for a little bit of homework, we've talked about it before. Many of you have participated with us. If you have a question, you can use the control panel on the GoToWebinar and submit a question that way, or you can do it by email at webinar@vannattorneys.com. So let's look at some of the topics we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be looking at invoicing, follow-up, and review. I know that's a lot of you do that on a very regular basis and do that well. We're going to look at how to identify aged accounts for activity. What are you looking for? We're going to look at determining what to do and how to collect that, how to review your credit accounts, and also review your accounts receivable best practices and plan for next year. Hopefully this will be helpful to you. So obviously the goal is we're going to make your working capital work for you. And I know many of you are in companies that are privately owned. Some of you are in larger companies. Doesn't matter really, because capital cost is pretty much the same either way you go. But we all know the sooner you collect your receivables, a lot of that money can be going into working for your company. We get that. Actually, when we talk to your customers, the debtors who owe you money, they see a big company on the other side. They think, well, this company, this supplier, this creditor doesn't need the money as bad as I do. And a lot of times when we explain to them that that you are having to borrow money, or that you are having to answer to the bank based upon the receivables and your cash flow, they start understanding it a little bit differently, and they understand that you're in that same situation that they are, just in a different scale. So we all know that working capital is important. And given the cost of new capital, we all know that it's better not to allow existing capital go to waste. So obviously, if you're writing stuff off and just letting it go, sometimes that's a good business decision that you have to make. We also know that there is a cost to that, and obviously there's probably 1.5% to 2% of whatever you're writing off. In addition to that, to have to make up for that down the road. So you got to have at least probably 2 to 3 sales to make up for what you write off. Also, it's better to receive than to lend, at least for most companies. We all know that when I was worked for a bank many years ago, obviously that's how you make money, is lending money. But also you want to receive it back, and hopefully the cost in interest or finance charges to recover that cost that you had to lend the money out. So it's much better to receive it than to lend it, and you want to get that money back in. So what are some of the common causes? Well, obviously insufficient time to follow up with customers in a timely manner. I know, because we talk to many of you on a daily basis, you are inundated with a high volume of work. We get that. So when we talk to a lot of our customers, our clients, we talk to them, and some of the things we hear from them is that they just don't have time to follow up with all of the customers as closely as they would like to. You are, doing all you can in many of those circumstances to actually just get up with the ones that you're touching base with. And obviously, if you could have a tighter, closer follow-up, then it would work a little bit better maybe. Also, some other common causes: allowing sales staff to override credit limits. And usually the sales staff can either override it through relationships within the company, or they can say, hey, look, this person's good for it. This is a great customer. Let them, let the sale go through. Certainly, we all know that that's an issue. Also, inaccuracy of the billing, and I know that's not necessarily falls within the confines of collections, but that generally creates an issue. So if you're having an inaccuracy of billing, if that's a repetitive situation, you know that there's a process that you need to have remedied to get that fixed. We always look, when we're trying to help our clients, we're trying to look for processes. Are there things that are tripping up the company that are driving up their receivables? And so you can try to fix the problem, not just fix that one issue, but fix the entire problem. One other that we hear a lot of is the allocation of payments, and they allocated the payment incorrectly, and the customer is upset because if the customer directs where the allocation is, depending upon again the contract terms, then you're supposed to allocate the payment that way. If not, then typically most people allocate the payment to the latest or the oldest invoice first, and or finance charges. So those are some of the common causes that we see. So let's look at the invoice follow-up and review. Obviously, sending invoices and sending them timely, it makes all the difference in the world. Send statements, follow up, be that squeaky wheel. Make sure that you're sending it to them on a regular basis, sending it to them on a timely manner, and that I know a lot of people now are doing it by email. Make sure that your email that you have a good email address. And generally speaking, that's a great way to make sure that you're connecting with your customers. I don't know if many, probably in the finance portion of the companies, would get a report to find out how many of those emails did get opened or not, but generally speaking, you can track that. So make sure that you're working with your IT folks to figure out, hey, if we're emailing our customers, are they actually getting it and are they opening it? So you can track that pretty easily. And be consistent. So being consistent will, and a lot of times, add more value to the collection effort. Keep calling them every other day, every third day, whatever the situation calls for. Touching base with them. Emails are great, but also I think, and maybe because I'm of the age that I am, I think phone calls matter. That's a relationship issue, and it's sort of hard to walk away from a phone call if you can actually get people to answer. Emails, can be read and sort of ignored a little bit easier. So again, look at the consistency of how you follow up, and then make sure that's a timely follow up. So, for example, if you're touching base, you sent the invoice today, this customer's having a cash flow problem. Maybe call them, Friday, call them Monday, touch base with them. Want to make sure you got the invoice, because we've all heard, hey, I didn't get the invoice, I didn't get the statement. All right, I'll send it again. And make sure that they get it. And then calendar for the follow-up, for the reminders. If you say you're going to call back on Wednesday, make sure you call back on Wednesday. That's so important to touch base and be consistent in the follow-up. So let's look at some issues about identifying aged accounts. So what payment trends can you determine with the customer? If you're looking at this at a customer's history, and they're sort of all over the board. Sometimes they're paying 30 days, or they first started out paying 30 days, and now they're heading to 45 or 60. Can you see a trend in how they're paying? That's something that's worthy of trying to look at and trying to determine on your history records. What issues do you think your customers are facing? Are you talking with them? Is the sales staff talking with them? Does the sales staff share that with you? You may know of a situation where, say, a customer is getting ready to go into a larger project, and this project is taking all of their time, all of their effort, and unfortunately, some of their other projects may be falling off their calendar, or it may be impacting their receivables. You want to know that as best you could. And then, obviously, why is the customer paying late? What's going on? Are they not paying attention to the detail of their business? Is it a cash flow issue? Is it a family issue? Is it, we hear quite often a lot, someone embezzled money from a company. So you got to think about that a little. Is that hitting them? Do they have issues with staffing. Again, something to think about. So we've got a poll question that we want to throw out for you to answer, and it's up now. So I'm trying to figure out if I can see it. I'm looking at our staff folks here who are helping me. All right, here it is. So when are your receivables greater than 30 days? Typically higher in what quarter of the year? First, second, third, fourth. So if you will answer that, when are your typical receivables? That's greater than 30 days, higher, which quarter? And we'll get ready to close that out in just a little bit. So give you a few more seconds to put your vote in, and then we'll close that out and show you the results. All right, so we're showing you the results. I hope that's popping up. And so it's a little bit, it's interesting. So third quarter is the highest when your receivables are greater than 30, and then sort of tied for first and fourth quarter. So hopefully that helps you in your business a little bit. You can hopefully get a read on that, maybe from how that might impact others. So third quarter is the highest. I actually was thinking maybe fourth quarter was going to be, but so all right, what do you do to collect? Obviously, as we talked about before, being consistent generally pays off. Keep the customer on a short time frame. I'm chasing this guy right now, and he keeps putting us off. You know, he'll say, "Well, I'm getting this big contract next month." I've heard that so many times, and I just can't deal with that anymore with him. I'm like, so let's back up. We're not looking for the next time you're signing a contract or having a closing. We got to bump it down to another, within a week now, as to when he's going to make a payment. You keeping people on a tight, shorter time frame generally pays off a little bit faster. And then follow back up, talk to them, call them, email them, however you say you're going to do that, when you say you're going to do it. And I know many of you do this, and I say this to you as an encouragement, keep good notes on the conversations with the customers. So if they're saying, you know, I've got a big closing coming up on Thursday, and I'll be able to pay on Monday. So when you talk to them on Monday or Tuesday, you'll say, hey, look, you had the closing on Thursday. How'd that go? Where's the cash? Can we get this paid out? So keep really good conversations. And then also calendar reminders for follow-ups with the customer. So if you know, I know many of you use a calendaring system with your AR, so use that calendaring system to remind you as to the follow-up. This is another just piece of great advice that we've heard from many of you, is to listen to the customer to determine what's going on in their business. You'll hear a lot of times, you know, sometimes they're going to say, oh, forgot, I'll get you paid, no big deal. Or there may be something going on. We're helping a customer right now, and our client is having a problem with their customer. The customer has already received the funding from the bank. Bank's closed it out, but the customer hasn't paid our client. And when you talk to him, it's, you know, I'm paying this out of my pocket, out of our cash flow of the business. He's like, well, wait a minute, you borrowed money to pay to our client for this. Why did you not do that? Well, I used it for something else. So again, we're learning more. We're learning that their cash flow in that business is not as good as we were thinking. And again, it took about 3 conversations for that to come out. So listen to what the customer is telling you, and hopefully you can learn more about what's going on in their business. And being the squeaky wheel, that's not a bad thing. Be the squeaky wheel. Don't break the law and call them at midnight or have a robocall, you know, 25 times a day, because that's not going to work out well. But be the squeaky wheel and follow up, have communication with them on a regular, ongoing basis. And having a relationship with your customer. I know many of you, at least years ago, had the opportunity to go visit with certain customers, and you know, certainly have that one-on-one FaceTime. Or if they come into your business, make sure that you have the opportunity to go speak to them and say hello. And sometimes it's just a telephone relationship, but those are better than not having a relationship at all. You don't want just the sales staff to have the relationship with the customer. It needs to be across other divisions of the company as well. So again, create the relationships with your customers. What about the customer fails to respond? Consider using outside collection help. And sometimes that could be outside the business or it could be inside. Consider asking the customer for a confession of judgment with a payment schedule. We that's a legal document. We would encourage you not to draft it yourself, and that's not self-preservation for our business. But if you start using a confession with a payment schedule, there are times we've had some clients who have tried to do the confession themselves, changed enough, and when they needed to file it, the clerk of court would not accept it because of some things were changed. So you really want to make sure that you get that well. And most of you probably know about the confession of judgment or that idea. It's basically where the customer says, look, I'll pay you, but I can't pay you now, but I'll pay you over time. And it's something that you have to agree to and that they have to agree to, but it's one of those where it's better than a promissory note because you already have a promise to pay, so you don't need another one. But it's a confession where they say, yes, I owe this, I will pay it back this way, and if I don't pay this, then you can file this piece of paper, and you have a judgment against your customer without ever having to file a lawsuit. It's a really nice savings for you, number one, but number two, it really puts the pressure back on the customer to do what they say they're going to do. So that's certainly an opportunity to think about. And then get buy-in from your customer on the payment. Hey, does this make sense? When you're talking to your customer, you really want to try to get feedback from them and get them to say yes as many times as you can. So a lot of times, we'll be talking to debtors on your behalf, and we're working on a payment schedule. Let's say it's $10,000 a month, and they say I can pay 6 or 7, or say you get them up to 10. Can you do that? Yes. Will you commit to making the $10,000 a month? Yes. Will you get that on the 15th or whatever the date is? And you're getting them to agree verbally, but you'll also have it in writing eventually. So does that make sense? And can you pay the account by X date? Or can you help me get this paid out? And again, sort of get a verbal thing going on with them. So we've got one more poll question, and we're going to pop that up. So when do you consider using outside help with collection? So this is another poll question. We'd love your feedback. When do you use outside help with collections? Collection agencies, attorneys, or others. So we'll give you a few more seconds to answer that, and then we'll pop up the results for you. All right, so we are looking at the poll in progress for attendees only. So we'll close that out and see what the results come back in for as. So it looks like it's about 46% lack of response, which makes sense. And certainly after a certain aging, those two things are the highest voters. Makes sense, lack of response, certain aging. So good, thank you for doing that. I hope that helps you as well. I hope you get some benefit out of that poll question. So what do you do to collect? Show that you're listening to your customer. I've had a chance to participate with a training class through NACM, and there was another speaker on the panel, and a lot of you know this lady, who she just does an awesome job of relationship with customers, and her goal is to always try and build a relationship with your customer. And she was talking about listening to the customer, and the more I've looked at that, the more I've done this, the more I realize how important that is. Use phrases that exhibit that you're listening to your customer. For example, I understand, after they've made a comment. You're making total sense, and in your position, obviously. The situation you described is difficult. I get that. I'm sorry that's happening to you. Sorry that's happened to your business. I see. What you're saying here is, and then repeat back what they're saying. And then another one similar is, that sounds frustrating. And I know many of y'all have used phrases like that, and you probably have others that you say that you may or even may not know that you're putting in. But I think that hopefully that helps you to, again, you're building rapport and you're building a connection with your customers. We had a few questions that I want to go over. These were submitted earlier during the day. And one of the questions was about hiring a collection agency. So the question was, do I have a reference to, and I've got some, and I'll shoot that back out directly to that person who asked it. But it really sort of made me think about about hiring collection agencies. We've got clients that have done that over the years. I want to give you a little bit of warning on it. Obviously, there are really good collection agencies, and there's some that you want to stay away from. We had a client who got approached by a collection agency on a matter a couple of years ago, and our client had not used that agency before. Agency said, "Hey, look, we know the people. We can make this thing work really quick." He did it, and it really turned out bad. And I'll tell you why. The collection agency did and said things that they shouldn't have said and should not have done. And the party who they were trying to collect from wound up suing our client, and it cost him a lot of money. Now, the good news is he won, but the bad news is it cost him a lot of money to win. So you really want to make sure you know who you're doing business with, and you also want to make sure that they have a good track record. We've also heard from clients before that they've turned accounts over, and they were proven that the customer paid the collection agency, but the collection agency took the money. So that's something that you want to be really cautious of. Most state laws, and I can tell you about North Carolina, if they have to be, number one, approved by the state to do business in North Carolina as a collection agency, and they're supposed to be bonded. Well, the bond is there to protect them stealing the money. In this case, the company was not licensed in North Carolina, obviously didn't have a bond, and they eventually closed up. So we couldn't do it. That didn't help us anyway. But collection agencies, that happens some. I mean, it's just like any other business. There are good ones and bad ones. Just make sure you know who you're doing business with. We had another question that talked about recently the credit manager of this business was informed that you can no longer collect agency fees in North Carolina, regardless of what your terms say. And I think that's correct. I do not know of any statute in North Carolina that says you can recover collection agency fees in a case. Now, the law does say you can recover attorney's fees, and that's generally limited when it's in writing up to 15%. There's some other provisions and other statutes that allow you to get actual attorney's fees, but for most of you on your open accounts, it's going to be limited to 15% of the principal amount due and owing. So you can recover attorney's fees, but unfortunately for those who want to use collection agencies, I don't know of any statute that says that you can recover collection fees with. It's certainly they could pay it voluntarily, but I don't know many that will. I don't know of any statute that requires it. So I hope that helps. We have a couple other questions I want to go over. One was when collections are failing, do liens, that is a claim of lien, actually work? I would say yes, they do, because that's another tool to use for the collection process. Or when your customer is asset poor and cash flow driven, where do you find the leverage to compel payment? That's a great question. And leverage changes all the time in cases, changes with parties, and it's sometimes a timing factor. So not being able to answer that question specifically because every situation is different, I would say look for the leverage. If they're cash flow driven, obviously trying to get into that cash is the best thing you can do because hopefully their foot is on the pedal to drive more cash. I hope that makes sense. I hope that helps. So reviewing the credit accounts, do you have recurring issues? We talked about it a little bit before, that credits are constantly always due. Were there delivery issues or incorrect application of payments, promises of others in your company to take care of something that doesn't happen? So is that an issue that you're constantly facing? If it is, that's, again, something that you can look forward to trying to correct from a process standpoint and hopefully improve that for your business. If that's a problem, what do you do to remedy that? So step one, say it's a credits issue, credits are due to the customer because of some issue. Step one, what do I need to do to fix that? What's step number two? Many of you know I love leadership development, and I really love processes because processes and leadership have been proven to improve your business. So if you look at that, I'm trying to help you decide if if it's a delivery issue, if that's a repetitive delivery issue, is it a particular driver? Is it a region? Is it a software issue? Figure out what's causing that so that we can get it fixed. And a lot of times that impacts your accounts receivable substantially. Are credit limits appropriate? We all know, you get a customer in, you may set their credit limit at a certain dollar amount in the very beginning, and then it inches up based upon their purchases, their history, good history. But is it appropriate? Is it too high? Is it too low? Again, great time to take a look at that. Are there accounts that need to be closed? We all can probably agree that you're spending probably 80% of your time on 20% of your customers. Does it make sense? Or are those customers that you're constantly chasing worth what y'all are having to spend to get the dollars in? You can make that decision. We just got a phone call from a new company that's setting up in North Carolina, and they're going to start selling in a particular industry in North Carolina. And I told them, I said, hey, y'all know you're going to be the new kid on the block. All the people who are struggling with other vendors are going to be knocking on your door this year and probably next year. So they've got to get ready for that. You may have some of those that came in accidentally. Do you need to close that? Do you need to get them out of the picture, or do you need to just limit their credit? Do you need to ask for guarantees on troubled accounts? Certainly, I think most of us think about personal guarantees. I want you to start thinking about cross-corporate guarantees. We see, and again, I think it's an economic-driven issue. We see customers that have, your customers, the debtors, have 2 and 3 different companies. They may have one company that does, say, a type of work, another company that does another type of work. One of those is more of the asset-driven company. The other one's more of just the operational, but they only want to have the operational customer sign on the account. So, and you know that there's cross ownership of the companies. Does it make sense to have a cross corporate guarantee? I really would get you to think about that. We see that a lot today, where companies, it's a lot easier, probably in some respects, to have multiple companies today than it was 20 years ago. Do you need to get collateral or other protection for your accounts? Do you need to have a deed of trust? Do you need to, we've seen where people get liens on vehicles. I would challenge you that may not be the greatest protection, because number one, they devalue, can be moved, and they can be hidden. Real property, it's hard to hide that. So getting a deed of trust on a piece of property that just sits there is a great way of collateralizing your agreement with your customer, especially if the sales volume goes up pretty significantly. So let's look at some best practices for next year, this year coming up. So how many new accounts did you open in 2018? So you want to look at that. How many of those are, out of those, what's the top 20 largest accounts? Did you have challenges with those? Does anything need to be changed with that? Is the credit limit good? Do you have guarantees? Those are some things that I would get you to think about, just from a standpoint of looking back and now planning to go forward. Does that help you when you look through that? Are there top accounts in your AR reports? That is, the dollar as far as your sales go. This is my largest customer, but they keep showing up in my AR report. I would ask you, why is that happening? Is it a cash flow? Are they holding on to the dollars so that they can help their own cash flow, not an unusual event? And is it a relationship issue? Do you need to have conversations with them going in 2019 to say, guys, we can't afford to wait 45 to 60. We have to dial that back down to 30 or 45 and keep it there. Great time to think through that and have that conversation. So we also had a few other questions. So one of the questions that came in was, what are acceptable payment terms or terms of customers who you don't want to lose, but they can't pay their bills? And that's really a case-by-case question. I would encourage you, don't go out past 9 months or a year. But again, it depends on how large the account is. Certainly have it in writing. I would tell you to get a confession of judgment instead of a promissory note. Again, that just puts the money, asks them to put their money where their mouth is. And also have a finance charge. Another question we have, what's an acceptable interest rate? Many of you charge 1.5%. Based off of what you have to borrow to keep your cash flow, what's it costing you? I would tell you, 1.5% is a great place to start. You want to be careful not to go too high, because you could get into a usury standpoint with other issues in North Carolina, but that's generally where I would tell you to be, and that's 18% APR. That's high, but it's also, otherwise they got to go borrow money themselves and pay you. And another question we had is binding arbitration a good idea? I tell you, I struggle with. I mean, obviously, if you're going to go to the expense of arbitration, you want it to be binding because you don't want to have to. Other party can, say I'm not going to be bound by it. Arbitration can be. It's not cheap by any means, and sometimes it's faster, but sometimes it can come back to bite you as well. So I really would get you to think about requiring arbitration versus making it a option. The other thing I want to ask, somebody asked this is, can I send a client a form 1099 for dollars that you didn't collect? Because it's obviously not income and they've gained some value. You can, but I think the case law is pretty clear that once you do that, you cannot then continue to try to collect it. I think there's an issue with that, so be really careful. So let's look at some other best practices for this coming year. Are there customers that you need to move away from? And that's tough because, look, we're all about sales. Sales is what we're all driven for. We need it. But there's also sometimes you need to close a relationship. So just to ask that question, I'm not advocating it, just to think about it. Are there customers also who are costing you more than you're making on the sales? That's something that y'all really need to sit down and look at. And you probably can tell you can probably pull that up. 10 to 12, 15 of those customers, you can look and say, look, this is costing us more than it's worth. Do we need to keep these folks? So one other thing I want to just encourage you with, as far as best practices for this coming year, you want to accomplish the following 3 things next year to improve the work that you do. I would encourage you to write this down. Take a pad, go somewhere quiet by yourself to think about what you can do. Just pick 3 things. What can you do to improve the work that you're doing? And think through it a little bit. Is it finding more time to close your door and study the accounts? Is it spending time with your customers? Is it spending time talking with the sales staff? You get to decide that, but really stop and sort of think through that. How can you take just 3 ideas? Because I guess, let's face it, if you did 30, you're not going to do those. 3 is much more manageable. How can I take these 3 items and improve the work that you do for your company? So if you've got questions, we'd love to hear from you. You can always call us. You can email us, reach out to us. We love helping you and love answering the questions for you. And also, I would encourage you, if you're not following us on Twitter or LinkedIn or something like that, please do that because we try to send out information. We hope it's helpful to you. I know many of you are on our mailing list, which we send out emails and so forth, and Instagram as well. If you're on Instagram, we'd love for you to do that. So again, thank you so much for participating today. Thank you for your participation in the polls. We hope you have a very Merry Christmas, and we hope your family and you enjoy every minute of it. I want to say a big special thank you to Michael Fernald, who works in our office, who helps us with this, and Taylor Daughtry, who Taylor is a recent law grad from Campbell, has worked with us, and he's helping us today as well. So it's always a pleasure to hang out with you men. Thank you so much. Merry Christmas, and we look forward to working with you soon.